Good evening. I'm your host, Eric Dirks. There we go. Hold on. Good evening. I'm your host, Eric Dirks, for tonight's IDCTA educational piece with Lisa Borzynski. Tonight, Lisa is going to be discussing how to prepare you and your horse for traveling south to warmer climates and long trips in general, if there are any questions throughout our conversation, please ask them in the chat box, and I'll try to bring them up at an appropriate time, either at the end of the session or during. Lisa Dr. Brzezinski is a native of Racine, Wisconsin. She graduated from the UW School of Veterinary Medicine in 1993 and has been a part of the Wisconsin Equine Clinic team since 2006, specializing in sport horse medicine and lameness. Dr. Brzezinski is a FEI veterinarian and has been working at international competitions since 1999, including the World Equestrian Games and NEAX. She is a lifelong horsewoman and actively competes in eventing, hunters, and jumpers. Lisa and her husband, Bill, and daughter, Quinn, live in Eagle, Wisconsin, and currently own 6 horses. Welcome to the show, Lisa, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say about going to warmer climates.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, for some people, they're already on their way or en route, or maybe in Florida, as one of our listeners is. But for those of you that aren't there yet or are contemplating a trip south, or even, as Eric said, just any kind of long trip, we'll be just talking about how to prepare your horse for travel. But I think it's an appropriate time now with the weather that's coming to go ahead and think about moving on. So it's just a picture of our clinic, Wisconsin Equine Clinic in Oconomowoc. We've got a 50-stall hospital with full service facilities. These are pictures of me throughout the years. Eric remembers this horse very well because he helped me train this horse.
Oh, yeah.
So I have competed in eventing, hunters, jumpers, dressage, and some various other activities, a little fox hunting there, here and there. So this is at my farm, and this is what I'm trying to escape in the wintertime is -20 below zero temperatures. The horses that are covered in frost, and me bundled up so that I can barely move like the abominable snowman. So we can dream, can't we? We can all think about warmer climates and going somewhere warm. Well, it's not an impossibility. You don't have to be a competitor to do this. You can be an average Joe and make a plan and head south with your horse, or even just enjoy some of the equestrian activities that are happening in the southern warmer climates. So what's your goal besides not breaking up ice this winter? Who, what, when, where, and how? And I saw this poster actually one year when I was in Florida. Life's too short to live in the winter, so run away to the warmth of Florida. So who will go with you? Maybe you'll go with a trainer if you have a trainer, and maybe you're in a barn where people do travel for the winter, or maybe are going to some competitions. Some barns move for the entire winter, some maybe for a couple of months, some for a month. You may just want to go down and work with another professional that's based out of the southern states, in the Carolinas, Georgia, Florida. There are plenty of professionals that are down there, so you don't have to go with your own trainer. You could work with someone else. You could just go with some friends and just go enjoy the winter somewhere, or a week even. Go with your family, or maybe a combination of all of those. So I've done this in the past with my trainer, with some friends and family, working with other trainers, some of my longtime coaches that are based in the southern states. Oops. So If your goals are for training or showing, then you'll probably want to make sure you get hooked up with a trainer and kind of make some plans there. But there are plenty of people that go, such as Sue, who was on our show tonight, who just want to enjoy the warmer climates and just enjoy trail riding and pleasure riding. You can also just go down to watch some of the equestrian activities, the different shows, competitions that are happening. There are plenty of things to enjoy. Just seeing green and being warm while enjoying horses, or hopefully it's warm while you're there. The temperatures can vary a little bit. And so, as I said, there are many other things to do besides showing. You can watch top professionals in their disciplines, or just enjoy the green grass and sunshine, enjoy other tourist activities. But there are some amazing international competitions of all disciplines happening in the South. There's international polo, eventing, dressage, jumping. Actually, I don't know if this little video, it didn't work, but anyway, I had a fun little video of some dressage. Oops, sorry, getting out of there. There's combined driving. There are some Western sports. If you're going to Arizona, there are plenty of Western activities there, and the Arabian Sport Horse Nationals and the Arabian National Championships in Scottsdale in February. Thermal, California has lots of activities too. So there are international competitions and high level competition and training happening all across the South all winter long. There's some beautiful places to trail ride. There are state and national parks in nearly every state. There are some great resources on the internet, but one good one is called trailmeister.com, and they'll help you locate parks and national and state park and local trails all around the country, with some good information about those. You can go on guided trail rides and just go on a horse vacation somewhere. You could enjoy the beaches or take your own horse and go to the beach. So then you just have to pick a spot. So there are a lot of popular winter horsey areas. The most recognized would be in Florida, going to Ocala or Wellington, but Georgia has Chattahoochee. The Carolinas have Tryon and Aiken and Southern Pines. In Arizona, there's Mesa, Phoenix, Tucson. California has Thermal. Tennessee doesn't have a lot of competition during the winter, but there are plenty of places to go trail riding, and the weather is still generally fairly good for trail riding. This is a picture of the World Equestrian Center in Ocala. It's kind of a fuzzy picture, but this is just the Grand Hotel in front of the main jumper ring. And so this is a great place, kind of a Las Vegas style vacation, maybe if you are interested in just going even to watch. You don't necessarily have to be a competitor to enjoy this beautiful facility and all the restaurants and everything they have on site. There are plenty of places to stay. It can take a little bit of work to try and sort it out, and some of it's going to depend on what your activity you're doing. So any of the showgrounds you would be going to would have long-term facilities, for the most part, at WEC in Ocala, at Wellington, at the WEF, the HITS, the Florida Horse Park, Live Oaks, Tryon, Carolina Horse Park, and Thermal. Most of those have some more permanent stabling available, but there are also numerous hundreds and hundreds of boarding facilities in those areas. You can also rent your own barn or farm, and Airbnb and VRBO now are starting to list some of those equestrian properties that may be for rent. So you could go in with a group of friends or go in with your trainer or some people and rent a small farm, somebody's equestrian property. They can be of all sizes, just a couple stall horse barns, or an entire boarding facility, or in some cases, at like this particular picture, this was a boarding facility that just rented out a few stalls, so you could do sort of private rental within this boarding facility. So you could do your own chores and take care of your own horse to save money. And then, of course, there are campgrounds. If you've got an RV and have the setup to just, set up a little turnout area for your horse, tie lines, that sort of thing, if you're going to be trail riding. There are equestrian neighborhoods. So Aiken in particular, is a pretty much a horse community that is centered around, people just enjoying horses. It's not necessarily a real high intensity area, but you can rent out houses or farms, sometimes just, a couple stalls from people there. And then there are horse motels that we'll talk about in a little while, where you can stop on your travels. So when to go? Pretty much any time that it's cold here is a good time to go somewhere warmer. But most of the winter show circuits will run between about November. There's some of them that are starting to, kind of pop up now, but the vast majority of them will run from about the middle of January until April, and then things start to shift back up to the northern climates. But January, February, March, April are great times of year to go. Beautiful weather there, crappy weather here. You can really trail ride year round in those climates. It's going to be a little hot in the summer, but you could go pretty much any time to go trail riding. And then if you're going to just train with some professionals, that obviously would, could be a year-round thing. There are some trainers that are based out of the southern states year-round. Some of them may spend the winters in Florida and the summers up in the northern climates, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, or whatever. But there are plenty of people that are based there year-round. So they're really, the timing can be, anything that works for your schedule, kind of depending on what your goals are and what type of activities you're interested in. So how do you make this happen? So first of all, after you've discussed, what, when, where, and with who, then the how. So first of all, make sure your horse is ready for the travel. We'll talk about that. Planning your travel and accommodations for you and your horse. Trailer maintenance if you're going to be hauling yourself, and then coordinating feed, supplies, etc. for the trip there and back, and the time that you'll be gone. So first of all, you want to start with a healthy horse. So be sure he's in good body condition. You don't want to take a horse that's, completely out of shape and out of work, and then throw them on a trailer and expect them to be able to go do fun things or work or trail ride or whatever. So, if you haven't been riding all year, then, don't expect that your horse is just suddenly going to be able to, be this superstar and be able to do all this and travel. So make sure you're starting with a healthy horse. Treat any lamenesses or illnesses. Get the feet done regularly. Have the teeth checked. Make sure that they're on proper nutrition and that they're on a stable plane of nutrition, stable diet. If you have a horse that's susceptible to ulcers, you're going to want to talk to your vet and make sure you have a special plan for that particular horse. But any horse that travels is going to be at higher risk for ulcers. So regardless of your horse's status, it may be beneficial to put them onto some sort of ulcer preventative. There are plenty of over-the-counter feed-through medications that are basically the equivalent of taking a Tums. So most of the feed-through supplements that are for ulcers are going to be buffers. So they buffer acid in the stomach. They don't treat ulcers, but they can reduce the amount of acid in the stomach to help reduce the risk of ulcers. But that alone may not be enough to help prevent them. So we often will consider putting horses on omeprazole. Omeprazole paste, and UlcerGuard in particular is a product that can help prevent ulcers by stopping the acid production. We don't want to do this lifelong, but for short periods of time, it can be very beneficial to stop that acid production altogether, especially in periods of high stress. So have a discussion with your veterinarian about that, but think about putting your horse on that at least for the travel and then initial transition periods. Make sure they are up to date on routine vaccines. As I mentioned, the dental work and deworming. And then keep in mind that mosquitoes are considered year-round in Florida and some of the southern states. So it is recommended that horses that are in those areas be vaccinated twice a year for Eastern and Western encephalitis and West Nile, whereas in the northern climates, we just vaccinate once in the spring, because those vaccines give us about 6, maybe 8 or 10 months of protection, but those antibody levels drop off over time. So if you're going to be exposing your horse to, potentially a lot of mosquitoes or insects, then you want to make sure that they're boosted for the Eastern, Western, and West Nile before you go down there or while you're there. So just keep that in mind, that that's not something you would necessarily do in the fall here, but if you're going south, you'll want to do that. Then make sure that you've practiced loading and traveling in the trailer with your horse well before your trip. So if you have a horse that doesn't do well in the trailer, then taking him 20 hours to the southern states is probably not a great situation and is just putting everybody at risk. So make sure that you've practiced that they're very comfortable, easy to load and unload, because when you put them in a strange situation, they're not going to be probably as good as they are at home. But if they're not good at home, they're probably not ever going to get back on a trailer again if you take them 20 hours. So make sure you've practiced that and that they're comfortable with that. Even if you just go for short trips, go 20 minutes around the neighborhood. It's also good practice if you're going to be trailing yourself to practice driving the trailer. So make sure you're really comfortable with your truck and your trailer, your equipment, and that you feel comfortable on interstates, merging in and out of traffic, and have lots of practice with that. So maybe just tool around the neighborhood. Horses that have respiratory issues even before trailering are going to be at higher risk when they are trailered. But any horse traveling over about 6 hours, the studies have shown that there's an increased risk of respiratory disease. And that's because we have the stress of travel and new environments, which can suppress the immune system. And so that just puts them at higher risk. Their immune system isn't fighting off the disease as much. They've got a lot more exposure to particles in the trailer while they're traveling. And we'll talk about that in a bit, about how to reduce that. But all the particles that they inhale in the trailer and potentially ammonia, things like that, can cause some, low-grade damage to the lungs, put them at higher risk. And then they can also pick up diseases from other horses during their travel. They also, while they're trailering, tend to have poor clearance of clearing all the mucus and debris from their respiratory tract. So if your horse does have respiratory issues, talk to your veterinarian about potential preventative measures. Sometimes we'll put horses on prophylactic antibiotics or some sort of immune boosters. If they have allergies, then we want to make sure that they've got their allergy meds on board. I typically recommend soaking the hay. And if your horse doesn't like it completely wet and soaked, then at least try to make it damp so that we're reducing the amount of dust and particulate matter that's going to be flying around the trailer as you're going down the road. And then try to keep the hay bag or the manger at or below head level so that they can drop their heads. Make sure they're tied loose enough so that they can have their head level or below, that they're not being held up too high. And then also consider using dust-free bedding, or you can also take like a watering can and lightly soak your bedding also to decrease the dust as you're traveling. You don't want to go without any shavings. If you go with just the mats, then there's a risk of them slipping on the manure and the urine. And there's also an increased risk of with the ammonias that can accumulate. So at least the bedding helps to absorb some of the ammonia and the moisture. Then, of course, there's the dreaded paperwork. Everybody loves doing that, but make sure you check the current health requirements of the state that you're traveling to and any stops that you'll be making along the way. If you're just traveling straight through a state, then you don't have to follow those regulations. But if you're going to be overnighting, doing a layover in a couple different states, then make sure you've checked those state requirements as well. In general, most states just are going to require a Coggins, or the test for equine infectious anemia, and an interstate health certificate, and those are valid across the country. So an interstate health certificate from the USDA. But there are certain states that will have certain test requirements. In particular, if there's been like an outbreak, there have been some requirements in the past to test for piroplasmosis, which is a foreign disease, and vesicular stomatitis, which is also a foreign disease. They've had some outbreaks in the past in certain states, and then required testing. You'll have to have the temperature on your health certificate. Some states are really particular about that. You'll want to make sure that you're up to date, as I said, with your vaccinations. And if you have an FEI passport, if you are going to be competing and doing any FEI work, just make sure that you are up to date with your registration, that you've got the appropriate stickers, and that all of your flu vaccines have been entered appropriately and that are up to date. Check your regulations for that, but they have to have a flu vaccine every 6 months, but not within 7 days of competition. So make sure you plan ahead and make sure that your veterinarian has filled out the passport, because if it's not in the passport, then you can be fined and they can be fined. You also want to make sure that you have a microchip. Most people that have been competing in hunter jumpers now already have it because they've been required to have it. But for FEI, they're also required to have a microchip. And as of the end of next year, December 2025, all horses will be required to have a microchip. Make sure you keep digital copies of everything. I keep everything on my phone, all of my horses' health certificates and Coggins papers, registration papers, all of my member cards are all stored on my phone, so I always have it with me. But then it's also handy to make some digital copies. And for sure, if you're going to be shipping your horse with someone else, they have to have the hard copies with the horse, so the actual physical paper copy of the Coggins and the health certificate, not a digital copy. So again, with your passport, check all of your Coggins information, your stamps, your influenza vaccine, make sure everything's signed, dated, etc. So moving on, there can be pretty drastic temperature swings. So for example, the first year that I took a horse to Florida, it was -5 in Wisconsin when we left, and it was 87 degrees when we crossed into the state of Florida. So it's quite a shock to everybody, to the horse and to you. So in general, I think the best thing to do is to just plan to have your horse body clipped before you go, and then just dress your horse in layers. And so it's really helpful if you kind of layer it so that you've got like a sheet underneath and then your warmer blankets over the top, because then as you're traveling south and as it starts to warm up, you can just pull off one layer at a time to keep them comfortable. You don't want them, too hot and sweating underneath there, but you don't want them freezing either. So, and you do want to make sure, I think I list somewhere else, but you do want to have some ventilation in the trailer. So even if it's cold, you don't want everything shut up, tight, because there's a lot of moisture that will accumulate in there just from their breath, the condensation, and you do need a little bit of airflow, some ventilation through the trailer, but you can adjust your vents, usually the roof vents, if you open them towards the back so that there's a little bit of airflow, maybe crack the windows a little bit so you don't have air blowing on them and making them chilled, but just so that there's a little airflow. And then as you get into warmer climates, you can open those up more. So trailering options. Commercial trailering is expensive, but it's probably going to be the easiest and avoids the stress of trailering yourself. There are plenty of options, dozens of haulers from big companies, big commercial haulers that are traveling with big rigs across the country every day of the week, to local. Actually, I think I saw Vera Stock is on here. Vera and her husband Jim will do trailering, some long haul trailering, and some other people in the area can do private trailering. So there are lots of options for haulers, and there's the biggest difference is going to be in the trailering times and layovers, whether you want just a regular tie stall type area, 1 or 1.5 wide, or a box stall. Some of the big semis have air ride, which are a little easier for the horses, and can be quite a comfortable ride if they're in a back stall and an air ride. But that also, as you can imagine, adds up. So anywhere from Wisconsin to Florida, and depending on how many horses are going. So if you've got multiple horses in a load, then you will probably, get a little bit of a break, but 1,000 at the very least. And that's if you're lucky, but probably in the 2,000 to 4,000 range to ship a horse to Florida. So it's not cheap, but again, it avoids the hassle of trailering yourself and the stress if you're not comfortable trailering horses. If you want to do it yourself, then for sure make sure that your trailer is in good shape, that you've taken your trailer in for annual maintenance, which you should be doing anyway. So each year you should be having the wheel bearings checked and repacked, checking the tires, the brakes, the lights, taking spare bulbs, inspect the flooring underneath the mats, make sure that there aren't any rotten boards, and then as I mentioned, use the rubber mats and bedding for traction, cushion, and to absorb moisture and ammonia. Make sure that you're comfortable driving, practice backing and changing tires. As I mentioned, just go out on the road and make sure that everything seems to be working well and that you're comfortable. Learning how to trailer safely is really important, especially when you start getting on the interstate and you're going long distances. And then there are some good roadside assistance programs. Of course, there's always AAA, but US Rider is a good one for people that have trailers, because they can actually help you with horse accommodations if you're stranded somewhere. So you can look into that. They have memberships available for that, and they also have good information on traveling with horses and horse layover and horse motels, etc. So that's a good resource. So your first aid kit for your trailer, first you're going to want to have a toolbox with lots of handy little tools like a Leatherman, hammer and nails, screwdriver and screws, wire and wire cutters, and duct tape, zip ties. Those things are all really helpful if you end up having something break on your trailer, something gets loose. It's a great fix it. My dad is a farmer, and he says he can fix anything with duct tape and wire. So at least temporarily you can make something, work in most cases, if you get into trouble on the road. So have those tools available. Have a portable light or flashlight. I found these really cool lights now that I use for my vet work at Walmart that you can just charge up the battery, and they have their own little built-in stand. They're super bright lights, and so that's really handy. Even better than a flashlight, because then you can kind of light up the whole area if you are stuck somewhere at night and need some help. Scissors are great. Some work gloves if you do have to, change a tire or fix something, door latch broken or something like that. Take some water from home, and this we'll talk about a little bit later too, but about 20 gallons of water. You can just get, those little buoy containers, carboy containers to fill up with water from home for your horses so that you always have water with you. In case you get stuck somewhere where you can't get water for your horse, you want to make sure you have plenty for them to drink on the road. You can usually find gas stations where you can fill up your buckets, but don't rely on that. Make sure for your first aid kit for the horses that you've got saline, antiseptic wipes, stethoscope, thermometer, bute paste, and Banamine paste you can get from your vet, triple antibiotic ointment, eye ointment, towels, and then bandage material. If you're comfortable and if your vet feels comfortable dispensing it to you, a lot of times I'll give just a single dose of some sort of sedative that I put into a syringe so that it's ready to go if you were in an emergency, and if you flip your trailer or get in an accident and the horse is panicky, then you can just shoot him in the muscle of the neck. But talk to your vet about that. But some things to think about. So to wrap or not to wrap, and there's a lot of variables with this. A lot of it will depend on your particular horse. If possible, putting shipping boots or shipping bandages on is a great idea, especially for long haul. Whether your horse is a kicker or not, depending on or it doesn't really even matter, how they travel in the trailer. There are certainly things that happen on the road. You have to slam on your brakes, or you take a curve too fast and the horse is in the back and they're trying to balance, and so they can step on themselves or lose their balance, or just end up getting cut up. So having their legs protected and the heels is really helpful. So I really like to use shipping boots, but some horses aren't great about wearing those. So make sure that your horse is comfortable wearing them before you put them on for the first time in the trailer, because if they're kicking at the boots, that's not helping you any. So if they're good with that, use the shipping boots. For long hauls, I often will put some support bandages on underneath the shipping boots. But I like the shipping boots because they're padded and they do have that protection for the foot and the heel bulbs. It's really common to see heel bulb injuries when they accidentally step on themselves in the trailer, or their buddy next door steps on them. And then for some horses that may throw their head, you might want the head bumper. Not every horse needs it, and it depends too on like the size of your trailer. And if you've got a really low trailer, then that's probably a good idea, because one of the top 10 lacerations that I see in horses is when they bonk their head on the top of the trailer or in the stall, and then they have a laceration on their pole and down their forehead. So that would help protect that. Fleece halter covers are optional. Some people like to use those, and it's nice and soft and fuzzy. The only downside of that really is that if you do take your horse off the trailer and then suddenly they're being a little bit wild, you have a little less control because the soft cushioning doesn't really give you much control of the halter. So if you've got a really good quiet horse and you just want to be super nice and make them all nice and warm and fuzzy, you can put the fleece halter covers on. So on the road, be aware of traffic and anticipate. It's as much, there are crazy drivers out there and crazy truck drivers, car drivers, and people that don't understand horses, but that's your job too, to sort of be aware of those people and try to avoid them. So you can't avoid everything, but it is really important to, have your eyes open, kind of paying attention to what other drivers are doing around you. If you think somebody's going to be a little weird, just avoid them or let them in, or, try to, give yourself some space. Usually just stay in the right lane as much as possible. Watch for traffic that's merging on. They may, try to merge in front of you, and just, try to, again, anticipate what other drivers might do. So trailer cams can be helpful if you have those. They have a lot of nice ones now that are Bluetooth, and so you can kind of check on your horses and make sure that they're doing okay, that nobody's freaking out. Most of the time you can feel it if something really bad's happening, but it is kind of nice to kind of make sure that they're happy and they're munching and just, pretty chill. Limit your travel to about 10 hours per day. So plan ahead of where you're going, and include some extra time for your stops. So that's not 10 hours straight of driving, that's 10 hours of travel. So figure, you're going to have, be stopping every few hours, probably every 3 to 4 hours to get gas, to use the bathroom, offer your horse some water. So make sure you budget that time in there and kind of plan for where your overnights are going to be, where your horse motel will be, or your layover, and plan all that in there. So we talked about the damp hay, opening the vents. Probably not going to be real hot traveling in the winter, but if there's a hot spell and you're traveling through Florida, you might want to try to plan to drive in the evening or at night when the temperatures aren't as hot. Not likely, but if you're going to South Florida especially, you might run into that situation. So overnight stabling or horse motels can be found in advance or along the way, but if you think you need to stop a little sooner, you can always just check on the internet. You can sometimes get even last minute places to stay, but it's helpful if you can sort of plan those in advance. But when you do, make sure you ask lots of questions about, what their facilities are. Is it just a stall? Is it just a paddock? What kind of fencing do they have? Most of the places that advertise themselves as horse motels are going to be pretty good, but every once in a while there are some pretty sketchy places that can pop up. So ask for pictures, ask for information about their fencing, the turnout, the accommodations they're offering you, and then what your parking situation is going to be. If you've got a big rig or an RV or something, do they have room for you to pull in, to turn around? Are you able to stay there for the night? Do they have a place for you to stay? Some people actually just offer their homes. I've stayed in places where we just stayed in the guest bedroom at the people's farm. And then ask about arrival and departure times. Do they have a window where they want you to arrive? So make sure that all works out with or what you think will be your travel time. Biosecurity is important. So know who you're traveling with. This can be a little more challenging if you're going commercial because you don't know what other people are doing with their horses, but presumably if they're paying money to transport their horses long distances and with a good reputable commercial shipper, then they're probably going to take the measures to take care of their horses. But just be aware that diseases can spread easily, and if you're going with a private hauler, make sure that they're using good practices to disinfect the trailer, clean out the bedding, those sorts of things. And if you're going to a horse motel, things like that, you can just have some spray disinfectants to, at least try to do a bit of a disinfecting before you put your horse in a strange stall. Just using bleach or hydrogen peroxide based disinfectants in a squirt bottle can work. Avoid direct contact with strange horses. Don't share equipment with other horses, halters, tack, water buckets, wheelbarrows, etc. And ideally, it's a good idea to check your horse's temp twice a day throughout your trip, throughout your travel. Normal is 99 to 101, but call your vet if it's over 101.5, or if they're showing signs of cough or nasal discharge or lethargy, not eating, those types of things. So just the things we just talked about, biosecurity measures, avoid cross-contamination. And this includes at shows too. Don't have your horses drink out of water tanks at shows. Try to not put the hoses directly into your bucket. Hang or hold the hose over your bucket because somebody else might have stuck the hose into their horse's dirty bucket. Getting horses to drink when you're traveling is a big deal. There's water everywhere, but can you make him drink? So monitor your horse's water intake. Average horse should be drinking a minimum of 5 gallons, but up to 10 or even 20 gallons a day if it's hot out. And then typically less in the winter, but again, at least 5 gallons a day is desirable. But if they're not a good drinker, then know that before you go and try to play around with some different flavorings. There are a lot of different tricks we have for getting horses to drink. You can put electrolytes in their feed. You can use just table salt, a couple tablespoons of salt in their feed each day. You can put flavorings in the water, but if you do that, make sure you always have 1 bucket of plain water and 1 bucket of flavored water, just in case they don't like the flavor or they decide they don't want that. But play around with what flavors your horses like, whether it's horse quencher, apple juice, or Kool-Aid, Gatorade, electrolytes. There's a new one, I think it's called Guardian. That's like a alfalfa flavoring. You can even just use alfalfa cubes or alfalfa pellets and just soak those and put those in the water. I have a client that calls those Slurpees, just putting the cubes or hay in there. And then use buckets ideally rather than like automatic waters, so you can keep track of how much they're drinking. Feed, it may not be possible to bring all your hay from home. If you can, that is probably preferable because it'll be the same hay. But right now, it was such a tough year for hay that it's crazy expensive. I was actually just looking up some prices in Ocala, and some of the feed stores are selling it for $25 to $40 a bale. So it's crazy expensive. The quality may not be very good. You can get the Bermuda or coastal hay, the southern hay, much cheaper, but it's also a very different nutrient content. It's more fibrous. And if your horse isn't used to eating it, you're not, ideally going to want to feed that or transition them very slowly. So if possible, bring enough feed and hay from home. Contact feed stores in the area you're going to be traveling to see if they keep your particular type of feed in stock. And if not, then try to bring your feed with. And then at the very least, bring a week's worth of food and hay, so that if you can't find anything, then you'll at least be able to transition over the course of a week. Ideally, do it over 2 weeks, but a minimum of a week. This is another picture of WEC in Ocala. So other good information to have handy, keep your veterinarian's phone number on speed dial and their name. Most of us are going to be happy to talk to you, day or night. If you're a regular client, we're happy to help you if you're in a situation or you get stuck somewhere or you just don't know what to do, your horse is, not acting right. Give us a call. We can try to help you find somebody in the area, or at least talk you through what to do until you can get somebody. There is on the AAEP website, American Association of Equine Practitioners, they have a nice resource called Get a DVM. And if you just type in AAEP, Get a DVM, it will take you to that site. You can type in your location and then like a range, and they'll find vets that are AAEP members in the area. So you can try that. And then always have your name and contact information with your horse. You might even want to tape it onto their halter, so that if something happens while you're gone, or if they get loose, somebody's got your name and contact info, and then have an alternate contact info as well. Insurance information if you have it, which is a whole nother discussion. And I'll just say briefly, should you insure your horse traveling? It depends on the value of the horse, and what your resources are. If you can afford, to replace the horse, if you can afford the veterinary services, then insurance can be quite costly. Not so much for a month, but long-term horse insurance may or may not be worth it. And in general, I tell people just to keep a savings account for your horse activities, and instead of paying a premium, put that amount into your savings each month, your horse savings, so that you have that available. Because you can spend tens of thousands of dollars on insurance, and they don't always pay for everything that you think they're going to pay for. I think we talked about all this already. Good resources, your veterinarian, if you have questions. The internet, there are a lot of good resources on there. Just, be careful with some of the crazy stuff that's out there. But as far as finding hotels and transport and accommodations, things like that, there are some great Facebook groups now for people that are traveling. There's even one like specifically for snowbirds, snowbirds in Florida, snowbirds in Ocala, people going to Arizona. There are all sorts of resources out there now to help you find places to go and to stay and ideas for things to do. The Ocala Horse Connection, and then the US Rider I mentioned. That was a long talk. Any questions?
Lisa, that was so well detailed. Excellent presentation. I have been noting some things down as you were going, and I've made that trip several times going down to Florida, and I can't help but remember packing the trailer was as much hay as I can and overloading trailer. So I just wanted to bring up too, not to overpack to the point where it overpacks your truck and trailer and you're way over like weight to be handling down the road. And the advantages of forming a caravan with a bunch of friends to go down there. You could really distribute the hay amongst you guys, and yes, and hay is really expensive down south. So I always try to bring as much hay as I can with me. But boy, packing for Florida for the winter, it's you sometimes pack all your feed and everything else. You wouldn't believe how much that could weigh down your trailer very quickly.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Yep. And know what your rating is for your truck and trailer, and try to get an estimate of how much you are packing on it, right? So you don't cause problems by being overweight. Yeah, good point. Any other questions?
I think the biggest worry is when you go down there, whether or not the horse can handle the difference in temperature. Have you encountered like skin funguses down in Florida? That comes up a lot. Is there anything that you have in mind about preventative things for skin fungus, especially when you're clipping your horse?
Yep.
You may be more susceptible to it.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. And actually I meant to put something in there about that. So, so try first of all to clip at least, a week or two in advance, because what can happen is anytime you clip your horse, you can have tiny little, micro abrasions in their skin. And, when it's cold out in Wisconsin, they're probably not going to have as much of an issue. But if you've got any kind of broken or open skin and you go down to Florida or to some of the southern states where there's high humidity and a lot of organisms, and because it is kind of a year-round climate for organisms, there's some nasty bugs that we see, and we can get some really bad dermatitis from horses in especially in Florida, and especially South Florida, because of the humidity, because the water, there's just more organisms in the water. So first of all, don't do that the day before you're going to go. Don't clip the first day before you leave. Try to do it, a week or two in advance, make sure everything's all healed up. But the number one rule for, trying to avoid skin issues anywhere, any time of year, is clean and dry. So don't overbathe. Don't, and if you do have to bathe or rinse or those types of things, all the sweat, make sure that you scrape and that you dry the skin as best you can, and especially the legs and the lower legs. So really, really important to keep those legs dry. And then if you are starting to get some, little crusties, those sorts of things, get on top of them right away. There are a lot of different over-the-counter preparations, but then also some, stronger scratches medications that we will use or dispense. Even things like, Desitin or triple antibiotic ointment can be useful. But if you're starting to see that, get on top of it right away. Keep the crusts off and just try to, and then really try to avoid extra water. I don't like to scrub those every day because I think that just keeps them too moist. So avoid bathing, avoid washing, wash only as needed, and then dry really well. So, and then actually Vera brought up a good point. Another thing I meant to mention was, as you cross into Florida, that you are required to stop at the agricultural stations. So all horses, all horse trailers, have to stop at the agricultural stations for inspections. So you have to have all your paperwork ready for that. So thanks, Vera, for mentioning that.
Yeah, and I want to second that with the legs in particular. Whenever we clip the horse's legs and you're exposing the water, really towel dry them. That's the best preventative. And yeah, thank you, Lisa, very much. I don't see any other questions, but Lisa, that was so well thought out. Really appreciate your time and putting this together. This was fantastic, and we're going to have this in our library on the IDCTA website, idcta.org. Check it out if you want to come back and reference to this. Again, thank you so much for your expertise.
I'd just like to make one comment about that. If you're not a member, you're not going to be able to get into the library. So you have to be an IDCTA member to get into the library. So anyway, thank you very much, Lisa, from all of us at IDCTA. We really appreciate the effort you put into this.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And I am sure we'll have a lot of people looking at this from the from the library. So I'm going to cut off the recording, and if anybody has any other questions or wants to make any comments, please do them now, and we're good to go. Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Lisa.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
Lisa, what